My name is Sharon Wilson, 62 years old, and I spent my entire life making sure my son Kyle had everything I never did. When he married into the wealthy Thompson family, I was just happy he found love. But at his wedding reception, I was served last. Cold, congealed leftovers, while everyone else enjoyed hot meals. Then Kyle laughed and told his new wife, "She's used to eating what life leaves behind." The room erupted in laughter while I sat there humiliated. No one even noticed when I left. But what I did the next morning changed everything. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should value you most, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this story ends. The morning after I brought Kyle home from the hospital, I woke up alone. Tom, my husband of 4 years, had packed his things and left a note on the kitchen counter. "This isn't the life I signed up for," he wrote. "The kid's too much responsibility." Just like that, at 30 years old, I became a single mother with a 3-month-old baby and barely enough money to cover next month's rent. Those first few years were a constant struggle to keep our heads above water. I started waitressing at Dolly's Diner for the breakfast and lunch shifts, then picked up evening work cleaning office buildings. On weekends, I cleaned houses for wealthy families in the nice part of town. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. I still remember the night Kyle had a fever of 103 degrees. I couldn't afford to miss a shift, so I bundled him up and brought him to the diner. Dolly, bless her heart, let him sleep on a makeshift bed of booth cushions in the back room while I worked my shift. Every 15 minutes, I'd rush back to check on him, apply cool compresses, and coax him to sip water. By the end of my shift, his fever had broken, and I cried from relief and exhaustion in equal measure. There were countless nights I went to bed hungry because I'd given Kyle my portion of dinner. He never knew. I told him I'd already eaten earlier or that I wasn't feeling well. My clothes came from thrift stores or clearance racks, but Kyle always had new clothes for school. When his feet grew, he got new shoes immediately, while I stuffed newspaper into mine to cover the holes in the soles. Despite our financial struggles, I was determined that Kyle would have opportunities I never had. I worked overtime for months to afford his Little League uniform and equipment. I remember how my heart swelled with pride watching him run onto that field, looking just like all the other kids whose parents had 2 incomes and college degrees. When Kyle showed academic promise in elementary school, his teacher suggested a private school with better resources. The tuition was more than my monthly rent, but somehow I made it work. I took on a 3rd job delivering newspapers before my diner shift. For 6 years, I woke at 3:30 a.m. to drive through dark neighborhoods tossing papers onto porches before rushing to serve breakfast to people who rarely looked me in the eye when they ordered. But it was worth every sacrifice to see Kyle thrive. He was bright, popular, and excelled in both academics and sports. When college application time came around, I'd managed to save enough for his first year at State University. He also earned a partial scholarship, which helped immensely. The day I dropped him off at his dorm room was both the proudest and most terrifying day of my life. For the first time in 18 years, I returned to an empty house. Kyle graduated with a business degree and quickly landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm in the city. I beamed with pride at his graduation ceremony, though I felt somewhat out of place among all the other parents in their expensive clothes, discussing their vacation homes and European trips. Even after Kyle established his career, I continued to support him. When he complained about his small apartment, I withdrew most of my modest retirement savings to help with the down payment on his first condo. Every month, I still sent care packages with homemade cookies, his favorite snacks, and little necessities like socks and toiletries. He'd often forget to thank me, but I didn't mind. Mothers don't keep score. The dynamic between us began to shift when Kyle met Jessica Thompson at a charity gala his firm was handling. The Thompsons were old money, the kind of family that had buildings named after them at universities. Jessica had attended a Swiss boarding school and graduated from an Ivy League college. She worked in her family's foundation, though, from what Kyle told me, it seemed more like a hobby than a real job. The first time Kyle brought Jessica to meet me, I spent days preparing. I deep cleaned my small house, prepared Kyle's favorite meal, and even bought a new dress for the occasion. They arrived 2 hours late. Jessica barely touched her food and kept glancing around my home with barely concealed disdain, as if looking for dust I might have missed. "Your home is so quaint," she said in a tone that made it clear quaint wasn't a compliment. "Mom's always been great at making the most of what she has," Kyle replied, and though he was smiling, something in his voice had changed. He was looking at my home, the home where I'd raised him, through Jessica's eyes now, and he was embarrassed. After that first meeting, my attempts to connect with Jessica were met with polite indifference at best. She declined my invitation to lunch with a vague reference to her packed schedule at the foundation. My friend request on Facebook remained unanswered. When I sent a small gift for her birthday, a handmade scarf I'd spent weeks knitting, she sent a generic thank you text that Kyle had clearly forced her to write. Still, I held out hope that once she got to know me better, we might develop a relationship. After all, we both loved Kyle. Surely, that would be enough common ground to build upon. I couldn't have been more wrong. Kyle and Jessica announced their engagement 6 months after they started dating. They broke the news at an upscale restaurant where a single appetizer cost more than I usually spent on groceries for a week. I wore my best outfit and still felt underdressed. Jessica's enormous diamond ring caught the light every time she moved her hand, which she did frequently, ensuring everyone noticed. "We're thinking June at the Thompson estate," Jessica announced, barely containing her excitement. "Daddy's already contacted their wedding planner. She did Chelsea Clinton's wedding, you know." "That sounds lovely," I said, genuinely happy for them, despite feeling somewhat overwhelmed. "I've been saving a little money each month for Kyle's wedding. It's not much, but I'd love to contribute." Jessica's mother, Eleanor, raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "That's thoughtful, Sharon, but completely unnecessary. We're handling everything. The Thompsons have a certain standard to maintain for social events." The implication was clear. My contribution, financial or otherwise, wasn't wanted because it wouldn't meet their standards. "Mom's just trying to help," Kyle said, but his tone was dismissive rather than supportive. He quickly changed the subject, asking Eleanor about potential honeymoon locations. In the following weeks, I watched from the sidelines as wedding preparations moved forward without me. Jessica's Instagram filled with photos of venue visits, cake tastings, and floral arrangements. Kyle never called to include me in any decisions, not even for the mother-son dance song. I called him one evening, hoping to get involved somehow. "I'd love to come look at tuxedos with you," I offered. "Jessica's dad is handling that," Kyle replied. "He's taking me to his tailor next week." "Well, what about the rehearsal dinner? Traditionally, that's hosted by the groom's family. I could find a nice restaurant within my budget." Kyle's silence spoke volumes. Finally, he said, "Actually, Mom, the Thompsons have already reserved the private dining room at the Belgrave. Jessica's dad plays golf with the owner." I swallowed my disappointment. "I see. Well, is there anything I can do to help?" "Just show up and enjoy yourself," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice that I hadn't pushed harder. One afternoon, I worked up the courage to call Jessica directly. "I was thinking I could make my special apple caramel cake for the rehearsal dinner," I suggested. It was always Kyle's favorite. Her laugh was like ice water down my back. "Oh, Sharon, that's sweet, but we're having a 5-star catering team. I don't think homemade desserts would quite fit the aesthetic we're going for. But thanks for offering." Each rejection stung more than the last. I began to realize I wasn't just being excluded from the planning. I was being systematically erased from my role as Kyle's mother. At family gatherings, Jessica's relatives would discuss wedding details in front of me as if I weren't there. Her mother would make comments like, "It's so important for a young man to have proper guidance when entering society marriages," while looking directly at me. The final humiliation came when I discovered through Facebook that Kyle had participated in an engagement photo shoot. Jessica had tagged him in beautiful professional photos taken at her family's estate. They looked like models from a magazine. Kyle in a tailored suit I'd never seen, Jessica in 3 different designer dresses. Her parents appeared in several photos, beaming proudly beside the couple. There wasn't a single mention of me, not even in the long post, thanking everyone who had made their love story possible. That night, I cried myself to sleep. But the next morning, I made a decision I would maintain my dignity no matter what. If I wasn't wanted as a participant in the wedding, I would be the most gracious guest possible. I would not let them see how deeply their rejection had wounded me. I spent far more than I could afford on a simple but elegant dress for the wedding. I practiced my smile in the mirror, determined that no matter how I was treated, I would not cause a scene or embarrass Kyle. I told myself that once the wedding was over, things would normalize. This was just wedding stress and family politics. Once they were married, I'd find my place in Kyle's new life. I couldn't have been more wrong about that too. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Belgrave Hotel in a private dining room with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I arrived 15 minutes early, nervously clutching my purse as the maitre d' led me into the room. A few of Jessica's relatives were already there, clustered in small groups, champagne flutes in hand. No one acknowledged me until Eleanor Thompson approached, her silk designer dress rustling softly. "Sharon, you're early," she said, as if I'd committed a faux pas. "We're seating family at the front tables, of course, but you'll be at table 4 with some of our family friends. I'm sure you'll have a lovely time." I glanced at the seating arrangement. Table 1 held the bridegroom and Jessica's immediate family. Tables 2 and 3 were filled with more Thompson relatives. My table number 4 was positioned in the far corner, partially blocked by a decorative pillar. As more guests arrived, I stood awkwardly alone, watching Kyle and Jessica greet everyone with hugs and laughter. When they finally made it to me, Kyle gave me a quick one-armed hug. "Hey, Mom, glad you made it," he said, already looking past me to the next arriving guest. "You look beautiful, honey," I said. "I'm so happy for you." "Thanks," he replied distractedly. During dinner, I sat with 3 elderly couples who were friends of Jessica's grandparents. They were polite, but spent most of the meal reminiscing about country club events and mutual friends I didn't know. From my corner seat, I could barely see Kyle at the main table. After the meal, when guests began to mingle, I approached Kyle with a small gift box. "I have something for you," I said softly. "It was your grandfather's. I thought you might like to wear them tomorrow." Inside the box were a pair of simple gold cufflinks. They weren't flashy or expensive, but they had sentimental value. My father had worn them at his wedding, and though Kyle had never met him, I'd told him stories about the kind, hard-working man his grandfather had been. Kyle opened the box just as Jessica appeared at his side. "What's that?" she asked. "My grandfather's cufflinks," Kyle explained. "Mom thought I could wear them tomorrow." Jessica frowned. "But we've already coordinated all the accessories with the photographer. Your platinum cufflinks match my earrings and the groomsmen's tie clips." She looked at the simple gold cufflinks with barely disguised distaste. "These really don't match our aesthetic." I waited for Kyle to say something, to explain the sentimental value, to suggest he could wear them for part of the day, or even just to thank me for the thought. Instead, he closed the box and handed it back to me. "Sorry, Mom. Jessica's right. Everything's already planned out." "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the pain lancing through my chest. "I understand." I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. As I was about to exit the stall, I heard the door open and several women enter, their voices instantly recognizable as Jessica and 2 of her bridesmaids. "Can you believe Sharon's dress?" one of the bridesmaids said with a laugh. "It screams department store clearance rack." "At least she tried," Jessica replied. "You should hear the way she talks sometimes, all that working-class grammar. Kyle's worked so hard to refine himself beyond his upbringing. I just hope she doesn't say anything embarrassing during the reception." "Are you going to have her do a speech?" the other bridesmaid asked. God, no, Jessica said emphatically. Kyle agreed that it's better if just my father speaks. Sharon would probably go on about all her sacrifices and make everyone uncomfortable. They continued talking as they applied lipstick and adjusted their hair, unaware that I was listening to every word. I remained frozen in the stall, tears streaming silently down my face. I waited until they left before emerging, splashing cold water on my face and reapplying my makeup with trembling hands. I wanted to leave right then, to flee this place where I was so clearly unwelcome. But I couldn't bear the thought of creating drama before Kyle's wedding. So I returned to the dining room, smiled through the pain, and stayed until it was socially acceptable to leave. That night, I barely slept, Jessica's words echoing in my mind. Had I embarrassed Kyle all these years with my working-class grammar? Was he ashamed of me, of the life and home I'd provided through years of backbreaking work I tossed and turned, torn between hurt and anger, but determined to make it through the wedding day with dignity intact? For Kyle's sake, I would endure whatever tomorrow brought, or so I thought. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the Thompson estate early, hoping to see Kyle before the ceremony and have a private moment together. The estate was a sprawling mansion set on manicured grounds with white tents erected for the reception and staff busily arranging flowers and placing settings at dozens of tables. I approached a woman with a clipboard who seemed to be directing the proceedings. "Excuse me, I'm Sharon Wilson, Kyle's mother. Could you tell me where I might find him?" She glanced at me without real interest. "The groom and groomsmen are in the East Wing, but they're busy with photos right now and the makeup artist is with them. Best not to interrupt." "I just wanted a quick word." "Really, Mrs. Wilson, we're on a tight schedule," she cut me off. "Perhaps you could find a seat and wait for the ceremony to begin, or if you'd like to help, we need someone to direct guests to the gift table." I recognized the dismissal for what it was. Rather than argue, I found a bench in the garden and watched guests begin to arrive, all dressed in expensive attire that made my carefully chosen dress seem plain by comparison. The ceremony was held in the estate's private chapel, a charming stone building that could seat about 200 people. I entered and looked for my seat, assuming I'd be in the front row on the groom's side. Instead, a young usher directed me to the second row. The entire front row on Kyle's side was filled with Jessica's relatives. My heart sank further when Kyle made no mention of me in his vows. He thanked Jessica's parents for showing him what a real family looks like, and promised to live up to the Thompson name. Not once did he acknowledge the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him the opportunities that had led him to this moment. At the reception, I was initially forgotten during the family introductions. The DJ announced the bride's parents, grandparents, and siblings with elaborate praise. Then he moved directly to introducing the newlyweds. Someone must have noticed the oversight because he awkwardly backtracked. "And also in attendance, the groom's mother, Sharon," he said hastily. There was a smattering of polite applause as I gave a small wave, my face burning with embarrassment. For the dinner service, I was seated at a table near the back, with distant Thompson relatives and business associates who clearly had no idea who I was. I watched as the servers efficiently delivered plated meals to table after table. I noticed with growing discomfort that every table around mine had been served while our table remained empty. Finally, I quietly asked a passing server, "Excuse me, I think our table may have been overlooked for dinner service." "So sorry, ma'am," he said with barely concealed indifference. "We're running a bit behind. I'll check on your table's order." Nearly 30 minutes later, when everyone else in the room had finished their main course, a different server arrived with plates for our table. The food was visibly cold. The sauce on the chicken had congealed the vegetables limp and gray. I stared at my plate, trying to hide my dismay. It was at that moment that Kyle and Jessica, making their rounds to greet guests, reached our table. Kyle noticed my untouched plate. "Not hungry, Mom?" he asked. "It just arrived," I explained softly. It seems our table was served last. Kyle glanced at the cold food and then inexplicably laughed. He turned to Jessica and said loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear, "Don't worry about it. She's used to eating what life leaves behind." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe as Jessica tittered and several nearby guests joined in the laughter. Kyle, my son, the child I'd gone hungry for, worked 3 jobs for, sacrificed everything for, was not only participating in my humiliation, but actively leading it. I looked into his eyes, searching for some sign of the boy I'd raised, but saw only a stranger looking back at me. A stranger wearing an expensive suit and a Thompson family smile, who found his mother's lifetime of sacrifice worthy of mockery. With hands that suddenly felt very old, I placed my napkin beside my untouched plate and stood up. No one noticed as I quietly made my way between the tables. No one called after me as I walked past the gift table where my modest present, a handmade quilt I'd spent months creating, sat dwarfed by elaborately wrapped packages. No one saw me slip out the side entrance and make my way to the parking lot. As I drove away from the Thompson estate, tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to focus on the road. One thought repeated itself through my mind. He's used to eating what life leaves behind. My son's words, my son's laughter. Something broke inside me on that drive home, but something else, something I hadn't felt in decades, began to stir to life. I arrived home just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small house where I'd raised Kyle alone. Inside, every surface held memories. Photos of Kyle growing up his elementary school art projects. I'd carefully preserved the marks on the kitchen doorframe, tracking his height through the years. For the first time, these beloved mementos brought no comfort. Instead, they seemed to mock me, tangible reminders of a relationship that apparently meant far more to me than it did to my son. I sank onto the couch, still wearing my wedding outfit, and finally allowed myself to break down completely. All the pain, humiliation, and betrayal I'd been holding back rushed forth in great heaving sobs that left me gasping for breath. I cried for the little boy I'd loved so fiercely, for the young man I'd sacrificed everything for, and for the stranger in an expensive suit who had laughed at my expense. Most of all, I cried for myself, for the woman who had defined her entire existence around being a good mother, only to discover that in her son's eyes, she was nothing more than an embarrassment, a punchline. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was my sister Diane calling from Arizona. She'd moved there years ago for her husband's job, and we didn't talk as often as we should, but she had always had an uncanny ability to sense when I was in distress. "Sharon, what's wrong?" she asked the moment I answered. "I've had this feeling all day that something's not right with you." The sound of her concerned voice, the first kindness I'd experienced all day, broke through my fragile composure, and I found myself telling her everything: the months of exclusion, the rehearsal dinner, humiliation, and finally, the crushing words Kyle had spoken at the reception. "That ungrateful little—" Diane didn't finish the sentence, but her outrage was clear. "After everything you've done for him, everything you've given up." "Maybe I was a bad mother," I whispered, giving voice to the fear that had been growing all evening. "Maybe I did something wrong to make him ashamed of me." "Stop that right now," Diane said firmly. "You were an amazing mother. You worked yourself to exhaustion to give that boy opportunities neither of us had. You did without so he could have everything. If he can't see and appreciate that the failure is his, not yours." We talked for over an hour, Diane's righteous anger gradually giving way to practical advice. "You've spent your whole adult life being Kyle's mother," she pointed out. Maybe it's time to figure out who Sharon is. After we hung up, I found myself wandering through my house, seeing it with new eyes. Nearly every decision I'd made for 30 years had revolved around Kyle. Where we lived, how I spent my money, even the food I kept in my refrigerator still stocked with his favorites despite the fact that he rarely visited anymore. I'd never taken a vacation for myself, never pursued hobbies or interests that didn't somehow connect to being a mother. Who was I if not Kyle's mother? The question terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I stayed up all night, moving between grief and anger, between memories of the sweet child Kyle had been and the cruel reality of the man he'd become. As dawn broke, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad making lists and calculations. Over the years, I'd maintained a joint savings account with Kyle, initially established as his college fund. Even after he graduated, I'd continued adding to it monthly, envisioning it as help for a down payment on a family home or a fund for future grandchildren. The account now held just over $43,000, a substantial sum representing countless overtime shifts and deferred dreams. I also owned my small house outright. The mortgage had been paid off 5 years earlier, an achievement that had given me immense pride. Kyle had always casually assumed he would inherit the property someday, occasionally making comments about how he could fix it up and sell it for a decent profit when the time came. As morning light filled the kitchen, a plan began to take shape. For the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to consider a radical possibility. What if I put myself first? The thought was so foreign, it almost made me dizzy. But as I sat there watching the sunrise of the day after my son's wedding, a day that should have marked a joyful new chapter for our family, but instead had revealed the painful truth of our relationship, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done eating what life left behind. The bank opened at 9 a.m. I was waiting outside the doors at 8:55, dressed in fresh clothes, my resolve hardening with each passing minute. Martha, the branch manager who had known me for years, greeted me with surprise. "Sharon, I didn't expect to see you today. Wasn't Kyle's wedding yesterday?" "Yes," I said, simply not elaborating. "I need to make a withdrawal from the joint account I share with my son." Martha pulled up the account information. "The full amount?" she asked, eyebrows raised when I stated the sum. "Yes. I'd like a cashier's check for half and the rest transferred to my personal account." She hesitated. "This is quite a large withdrawal. Does Kyle know about this?" "It's a joint account," I reminded her gently. "And most of it came from my deposits over the years." After completing the necessary paperwork, I left with a cashier's check and the knowledge that I had taken my first step toward independence. My next stop was Patrick Henderson's law office. Patrick had handled my mortgage paperwork years ago, and though we weren't close friends, he had always treated me with respect. "I'd like to ensure that my house and assets are protected," I explained after briefly recounting the situation with Kyle. "And I need to update my will." Patrick listened attentively, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Sharon. We can definitely draw up documents to protect your property. And regarding your will, it's entirely your right to determine who inherits your assets." By noon, I had set legal protections in motion. My next call was to Helen Barnes, a friend from my former church, who had been trying to convince me to join her on a Mediterranean cruise for over a year. "Is that offer still open?" I asked when she answered. "The cruise, absolutely." Helen sounded delighted. "I've already booked my cabin for the September sailing. There are still spots available." "Then count me in," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I think it's time I saw something of the world." Helen's excitement was palpable. "This is going to be amazing, Sharon. We'll see Rome, Athens, Santorini, places we've only read about. Are you sure Kyle won't mind you being gone for 3 weeks?" "Kyle has his own life now," I replied, the words both painful and freeing. "And it's time I had mine." After lunch, I visited a real estate agent to discuss potentially selling my house. Not immediately, but perhaps after returning from the cruise. The agent was optimistic about the market and suggested a listing price that surprised me. My modest home had appreciated significantly over the years. "Would you be buying another property locally?" she asked. "I'm not sure," I replied truthfully. "I might want to try living somewhere completely different." The idea of starting fresh in a new place, perhaps closer to Diane in Arizona or near the coast I'd always longed to live by, suddenly seemed not just possible, but appealing. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of liberation. My final stop of the day was the community college where I picked up brochures about continuing education classes. In my youth before marriage and motherhood, I'd shown promise as an artist. My high school art teacher had even suggested I apply for scholarships to art school, but financial constraints and then early marriage had derailed those plans. The college offered evening classes in painting ceramics and photography. I found myself particularly drawn to the watercolor course, imagining myself capturing the Mediterranean landscapes I would soon see. As evening approached, I returned home and began a task I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Going through the house room by room, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to sell. In Kyle's old bedroom, which I'd preserved like a shrine, I began carefully boxing up his childhood trophies and mementos. I wouldn't discard them. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to erase those precious years, but they no longer needed to occupy central space in my home. In the back of my closet, I found a dusty portfolio containing artwork from my high school and early college days. The sketches and paintings were better than I remembered, showing a talent that had been set aside, but perhaps not lost. I set the portfolio aside, a tangible reminder of the young woman I had been before I became simply Kyle's mother. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the stars emerge. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I allowed myself to dream about my own future, not as it related to Kyle, but as an independent journey of discovery. The pain of his betrayal was still acute, but alongside it grew something unexpected: hope. The next morning, I woke with purpose and continued executing my plan. I visited a salon and asked for the haircut I'd always wanted but had been too timid to try. A stylish, sophisticated bob that took years off my appearance. I went shopping for clothes that reflected my personal taste rather than what Kyle or Jessica might approve of. By the end of the week, I had enrolled in 2 college courses, booked my cruise with Helen, consulted with a financial advisor about investing part of the money I'd withdrawn, and begun the process of redecorating my house to reflect my own aesthetic preferences rather than preserving it as a museum to Kyle's childhood. I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming my identity, and though the journey ahead would undoubtedly include more pain and challenges, I felt more alive than I had in years. The cold leftovers of my son's wedding day had become ironically the catalyst for the feast that would be the rest of my life. 1 week after the wedding, as I was painting my dining room, a rich terracotta color that I'd always loved but had been too conservative to try, my phone began ringing incessantly. Kyle's name flashed on the screen repeatedly, along with text messages growing increasingly frantic. "Mom, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "Why is half the money gone from our account? There must be some mistake." "Call me ASAP. This is important." I continued painting each stroke of the brush, a small act of reclamation. Only after I finished the wall did I wash my hands, sit down in my newly purchased accent chair, and return his call. "Mom, finally." Kyle's voice was strained. "I've been trying to reach you all day. There's some kind of problem with our account. Almost half the money is missing." "There's no problem, Kyle," I said calmly. "I withdrew my portion of the account." Silence then. "Your portion? What are you talking about? That's my inheritance money." The entitlement in his voice would have wounded me a week ago. Now it merely confirmed I was making the right decision. "That account was started as your college fund," I explained. "After that, I continued adding to it each month from my own earnings, envisioning it as help for your future." But given recent events, I've decided to use my share for my own future instead. Recent events? What are you talking about? Is this because you left the wedding early? Jessica's mom was asking where you went. I took a deep breath. I left after you publicly humiliated me, Kyle. After you told your new wife that I'm used to eating what life leaves behind, while everyone laughed at the mother who worked 3 jobs to feed you. Another silence, longer this time. I was just making a joke, Mom. You're being oversensitive. Perhaps, but that joke helped me realize some important truths about our relationship and my place in your new life. What does that even mean? And what are you doing with that money? You don't need it. You've always lived simply. I'm going on a Mediterranean cruise in September, I said. I'm taking art classes at the community college. I'm considering selling the house and moving somewhere new. I'm figuring out who I am beyond just being your mother. His shock was palpable even through the phone. Selling the house, Mom, you can't be serious. That's my childhood home. And what about the inheritance when you know? Jessica and I were counting on that for renovating our place eventually. The casual way he referenced my eventual death and his expectation of profiting from it struck me like a physical blow. But instead of retreating into hurt, as I once would have, I found my voice strengthening. The house is mine, Kyle. I paid for it with decades of hard work. As for inheritance, I've updated my will this week. Half of whatever I have when I die will go to children's education charities. The other half will be split between you and Diane's family with certain conditions attached. Conditions? What conditions? His voice had taken on an unfamiliar edge, part anger, part panic. That's between me and my lawyer, I said, unwilling to explain that the primary condition was evidence of genuine remorse and relationship repair. Kyle, I need to go now. I have plans this evening. Plans with who? The genuine confusion in his voice reflected how little he knew about my life beyond my role in his. Friends. I said simply, though I didn't elaborate that I was meeting with my new watercolor class for coffee afterward to discuss an upcoming local exhibition. After we hung up, I sat quietly processing the conversation. I had expected to feel guilty or conflicted about asserting these boundaries with my son. Instead, I felt clear and certain. The love I had for Kyle hadn't diminished. I suspected nothing could ever truly extinguish a mother's love, but it was no longer the consuming fire that burned away my own identity. The following weeks brought multiple attempts from Kyle to change my mind. He cycled through various approaches: anger, guilt, nostalgia, even financial arguments about wasting money on travel when I should be saving for retirement. When none of these worked, Jessica tried calling her voice honey sweet as she invited me to lunch to clear up any misunderstandings. I declined politely but firmly. I think we all need some time and space to reflect, I told her. I wish you both well in your marriage. 6 months later, I was sitting at a sidewalk cafe in Santorini. The brilliant blue Mediterranean spread before me like a dream. Helen and I were halfway through our cruise, and I was filling page after page of my sketchbook with watercolors of the stunning landscapes and architecture. My new bob haircut was now streaked with subtle caramel highlights. My skin was sun-kissed, and strangers often remarked on my vibrant smile. My phone chimed with an unfamiliar number. The text read, "Mrs. Wilson, this is Megan Thompson, Jessica's sister. I was at the wedding. I wondered if we might talk sometime." Curious, I agreed to a call the following day when our ship would be at port. Megan was direct in a refreshing way her sister wasn't. "I saw what happened at the wedding," she said. "The way they treated you was cruel. I should have said something then, but I didn't have the courage. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in our family approved of how things were handled." She went on to share that Kyle and Jessica's marriage was already showing strain. Jessica's controlling behavior, initially directed at isolating Kyle from me, had expanded to his friends and colleagues. There had been public arguments, tense family dinners, and rumors of Kyle sleeping in the guest room. "I'm not telling you this to gossip," Megan clarified. I just thought you should know that the perfect facade isn't so perfect, and that some of us saw your worth even when they didn't. I thanked her for her kindness, but refrained from commenting on Kyle's marriage troubles. Whatever happened between them, I had learned the hard way that inserting myself would only lead to pain. 2 weeks after I returned from the cruise, my phone displayed Kyle's number. It had been months since his last attempt to contact me. This time, I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice subdued. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the wedding, about what I said, about everything, really." I listened silently, giving him space to continue. "I was wrong," he admitted finally. "What I said was cruel and untrue. You never ate what life left behind. You gave me the best of everything and took the leftovers yourself. I see that now." "What's brought this realization?" I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. He hesitated. "Jessica and I are having problems. Her parents, they're a lot like her. They think they own me because they paid for the wedding, because they introduced me to their connections. Nothing I do is ever good enough." The irony wasn't lost on me. "That sounds difficult," I said. "I'm starting to understand what it feels like to be constantly judged and found wanting," he continued. "And it's made me see how I treated you, how I let them treat you." His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Mom." "I appreciate your apology, Kyle," I said carefully. "It means a lot to hear that, but trust takes time to rebuild. I'd like to take things slowly." He accepted this with more grace than I expected. We agreed to meet for coffee the following week. Neutral ground, just a short meeting to begin the process of reconnecting. A year after the wedding that had changed everything, my life was unrecognizable from what it had been. I'd sold my house and purchased a charming cottage closer to the coast, where the light was perfect for painting. I'd completed 3 college courses and was now enrolled in an advanced watercolor class. My first small exhibition at a local gallery had sold 4 paintings, a modest success that thrilled me beyond words. Kyle and I were cautiously rebuilding our relationship this time on more equal footing. He had separated from Jessica and was going through divorce proceedings that were predictably contentious. Though he'd initially moved back to the city where he'd lived before meeting her, he had recently mentioned possibly relocating closer to my new home. "I miss having family nearby," he'd said during one of our now regular Sunday phone calls. "Real family." The statement had brought tears to my eyes, but also a sense of cautious optimism. The boy I'd raised was still in there somewhere, finding his way back to authenticity after losing himself in the pursuit of status and acceptance. As for me, I was discovering that life's leftovers, when seasoned with self-respect and independence, could make for a surprisingly satisfying feast. The humiliation of that wedding day had not destroyed me. It had instead become the catalyst for the most profound growth of my adult life. The other day, a new friend from my painting class asked if I regretted the path my life had taken. The early single motherhood, the decades of sacrifice, the painful rupture with my son. "No," I said after careful consideration. "Without those experiences, I wouldn't be who I am today. We don't get to choose all our circumstances, but we always have the choice of what to make from what we're given. Life doesn't always serve us the meal we ordered. Sometimes we get cold leftovers when others are enjoying hot, fresh entrees. But I've learned that what matters isn't what's put on your plate. It's what you decide to do with it." Have you ever had to rebuild your sense of self after a betrayal by someone you loved? How did you find your way forward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of resilience, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that. It's never too late to reclaim your worth. Thank you for being part of this community, where we can share our truths and find strength in each other's experiences.